Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear us and see us. We'll be starting in just a minute.
The tweet
Actually, I need to do a mic test. Oh, I didn't do that.
Do a Steve test, too.
Steve. My voice recorder takes forever to load. I don't know why. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Oh boy, yeah, this. I don't have confidence in my voice recorder app today. Why? I don't know why. Testing 1, 2. Right, there we go. I'm ready to go when you are.
Almost there.
All right, I'll stop recording.
Minimize that. All right, you got the timestamps?
Am I doing that again this week? Yeah, I can do that again.
I could do it if you want, I guess.
I'm happy to do it. It's no problem.
All right.
I'm recording.
All right. I am now recording as well. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 267 for April 29th, 2022. Hey everyone, Deanna Rubino here, joining Zach Bowden for another exciting episode of the Windows Central Podcast, where we talk all things Microsoft Surface, Xbox, and more in technology. Oh, we didn't put it on the list, but I guess in terms of technology, should we talk about Twitter, Zach?
I don't want to.
I know. So Zach's on a deadline this week for the show, so we got to keep it short. Do
you have thoughts on Twitter? We can talk about it if you have thoughts.
I think everybody has thoughts on Twitter.
Sure, okay. We can talk about it briefly at the end.
We'll try to be brief at the end. This week's other topics, though, will be the latest on Windows 11. Of course, a new build just rolled out, and Zach will brief us on that. There were also some changes to Edge Canary, including the return of Mika, which is not a person, but rather a thing. Has to do with design, and it looks like Edge may be getting a little bit more fancy looking, which is something I think a lot of people have asked for. I'll try to... We're joking around about this, but Microsoft has an environmental report that came out today. It was done by a third party, and it was part of a issue that happened last October. So I'll put that into perspective, but it has to do with right to repair and repairability with Surface devices. And I got to talk to some people at Microsoft regarding that and Surface and how that all works. And so I'll kind of go through what that means and what I learned from that. But it's all good news for those of you who complained, that they couldn't repair Surfaces and how that's been changing with Microsoft. And speaking of Surface, we'll talk about the dynamic refresh rate on Laptop Studio finally becoming a thing. At least I believe it's on the insider channel. It's not official, at least for those who aren't. Although there are ways to sort of force this to happen anyway. We'll also talk about the Dell XPS 13 Plus, one of the most anticipated laptops of 2022, is finally now available for purchase. And there's not much to that story because I just kind of said it. But we'll kind of talk a little bit about that laptop. We'll also go through Microsoft earnings briefly because we know earnings is not exactly exciting stuff. But there was some news there with Surface, and it's relative. And I'll put it all into perspective, especially in comparison to Apple, Amazon, and Google, who all had, their reports this week as well. And then maybe we'll get to Twitter, and then maybe also Thing of the Week. I did remember my Thing of the Week from last week, which I forgot, and I remembered after the podcast. So if we do have time, I'll share that. If not, I'll try to remember it for next week. Zach, how are you doing on this fine Friday?
I'm not too bad. Before we carry on, Dan, your audio is crackling a little bit, so I don't know if you want to switch off your... whatever it is you're using.
There is nothing to switch off, unfortunately. Okay. I could wiggle the plug.
Just jiggle things around. Maybe that'll fix it.
I'll turn up a dial here. I'll turn on noise removal. Is it any better with noise removal?
It sounds a bit better, yeah. So we'll keep that for now.
Odd. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry for my crackling.
That's okay.
I noticed that actually when I was on TD Ameritrade yesterday too, and I heard the recording, I was like,
it could be a loose cable. Maybe it's in the back of your computer or whatever it is you're using.
it wouldn't be the back because that doesn't get touched. But I just let me unplug it. Hold on.
This could only go well. And we never heard from Dan again. Are you there? No, can't hear you. This is a good start to the podcast. While Dan's trying to fix that, we should probably dive into the first story. We'll start with the insider build. It's been a little while since we had an insider build. 2 weeks, or just about 2 weeks. Build 22610 rolled out to the dev and beta channels today on a Friday, so it's a rare Friday build. Like I said, I think they were really trying to get a build out because they haven't done so in a little while. Unfortunately, this build wasn't actually very big, so it was a long wait for not too much. In fact, this build actually removes a couple of features that I was excited about, unfortunately. But yes, build 22610. Big features for this release. There are now additional new MDM and group policies for IT administrators. Very exciting. They've updated the family safety widget, so it now shows a little bit more information. Including, your device usage today and apps usage and all that good stuff for your family members if you're an admin for your family group. They've also updated the lock screen with the correct battery indicator now. It was still using the old Windows 10 one. They are removing the ability to enable SMB1 by default. So that's interesting as well. They've also removed the build
Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, you're back. Hello.
So the good news is you can hear me. The bad news is voice recorder stopped.
All right. Start recording and we'll do a clap sync and we'll have to just pull the audio from the first recording bit.
All right. I am now recording. Oh, wait, but GeForce is on. Oh, yeah, you're right. I should not have unplugged.
Yeah.
Come on, broadcast. Load up. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
All right, where was I? Yes, they've also made it. They've also removed the build watermark from the lower right-hand side. And while they correctly note that this doesn't mean they're done, what it does mean is that they're almost done, and they don't mention that in the blog post because, of course, they don't. But yes, build 22610. We're now at that point in development where we're coming to the end. This is the sort of final leg of development for version 22H2. I'm hearing later. I think around May 20th or somewhere along there, that week or the week after, is when they expect to compile a final build. They don't use the term RTM anymore, I don't believe. That's old school terminology.
You don't believe?
I don't think they do. At least they try
don't
not
bring
to.
Up that topic with Microsoft.
No, I know. Yeah, but the old terminology RTM was just basically meant they're done and they're ready to ship it to OEMs. These days, that doesn't really happen straight away. They compile a final build, but then they continue working on it through patches and whatever else throughout the year, throughout the summer. So although there will be a final build in May, which can be deemed the RTM, Microsoft won't consider it done, and not until it ships in the fall with a cumulative update that sits on top of it. So later next month, we'll get a final build that will go into testing, and then over the summer, they will service that in the insider program with fixes and whatever else like they normally do. Maybe even new features. In fact, we'll get to that topic in a minute. I have heard some info about how Microsoft plans to sort of roll out features going forward. Some interesting stuff there. What else is in the changelog? They have the changes in widgets that bring more dynamic content to your widgets board announced with build 22516 is rolling out to more Windows insiders in the dev and beta channel. What I think that means is they're trying to, in the current shipping version of widgets, the widgets and the news feed are separate. In a future version, they're making it so it's all one feed. So whether you like that or not, besides the point, that's now available in this build as well. Task Manager's been updated. It now the heat maps in the Processes tab will now follow your accent color, which is pretty cool. So if you have a red accent color or a blue accent color, the heat maps will sort of mimic your accent color, which is really nice. They've updated a load of iconography here and there just to make it more Windows 11 consistent. And then everything else is just bug fixes and all that stuff. They have unfortunately removed the new tablet taskbar, which sort of minimized when you're using devices with a touchscreen and no keyboard attached. That's gone, and Microsoft says that may return in the future, but they've removed it for now, just to continue working on it behind the scenes. So that, I think that does mean, unless they're able to bring it back in a cumulative update, which I guess they could, but I think that does mean it won't be rolling out with version 22H2 later this year, which is bad news for foldable PCs. So yeah, I don't know how they're going to deal with that, because we are expecting this year to be a big year for foldable PCs in general, large foldable screen devices, and Windows 11 now won't be shipping with a touch optimized taskbar. So That's a bit of a shame.
So that's being pulled from the
Yes,
actual.
which is why, a couple of months back, the Insider program was like, hey, listen, the dev channel is for experimental features. And then they were like, oh, also the beta channel's for that as well. And this is why, because they can just pull features at any time for whatever reason. And they say, they're putting it based on feedback. I think it's reliability reasons. They need to sort of just ensure it works as expected. So, like I said, that could still show up later this year. It's gone for now. But yeah, who knows what the plan is for that, unfortunately. And that's basically all the sort of top billing stuff for this build. Like I said, yep, we're almost done. We're getting towards the end of this dev cycle now, which is to be expected. Are you running any insider builds on your PCs?
Probably. It depends on which PC I'm using at the moment. So I've been using the Yoga 9i, which I did promise that review this week, and it still hasn't gone live. That's because I had to travel, but that's the one I'm primarily using. That's not on a insider build for obvious reasons. But I do have it on the Pro 8, but I haven't turned that on in probably a couple days at this point. I still got to revert that SSD because I'm still having those kind of issues with it. So long story short, no, I haven't tried any of the new features, unfortunately.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, the 22H2 isn't as huge of an update. Like, I think that touch taskbar was going to be like one of the biggest changes, and now that's not shipping, or at least not coming anytime soon. So yeah, this update is a lot smaller now. There's still nice improvements here and there. We're still waiting for tabs in File Explorer. Who knows if that's going to be for 22H2 at this point? We are cutting it close. But again, Microsoft, even though there's a final build sometime in May, Microsoft can still add features to the OS over the summer. And even once it starts shipping, right? That's kind of what they did with the current version of Windows 11. They added the weather button to the taskbar just midway through. And on that subject, I have actually heard from a couple sources now, Microsoft is planning, because we got that first feature drop for Windows 11 earlier this year. I think it was in February. I was curious if that was going to be a common occurrence going forward. And according to my sources, Microsoft does plan to do this more often. In fact, I've heard that they plan to release feature updates to Windows 11 2 to 3 times a year. That's what I've heard so far. I think that could change, and I don't know if they're going to do that this year or if that starts next year. We've only had one so far this year. But the plan is to ship 2 to 3 feature updates for Windows 11 every year. Now, that's not OS upgrades. We're still only getting one major OS update a year. That's the 22H2, 23H2, which ships in the fall, likely in the October timeframe. These feature updates, I guess feature updates is a confusing term for it because that's what we used to call major Windows 10 updates. Maybe we should call them feature drops, but sort of features that roll out to the existing shipping version of Windows 11. And Microsoft is planning to do that 2 to 3 times a year. Internally, I've heard they're using the terminology moments. Moments throughout the year where they release new features to the shipping build of Windows 11. I might have this written up as an article next week. I need to find out a couple more bits of info first, but that's what I'm hearing. Microsoft plans to have 2 to 3 moments every year where they release new features to the public build of Windows 11 via a cumulative update or whatever they call them, LCU style release. And that's probably why, Microsoft can pull these things out here and there and just put them back when they think it's ready to go, because then they can just ship them in a cumulative update. It doesn't have to be a major OS release, and it can show up at any point in the year. It can be in the spring, it can be in the summer, it could be in the fall, who knows. But yeah, that's what the plan is going forward. Again, I don't know if that's starting this year or if it starts next year. Like I said, we've already had one major feature update. One minor feature update this year in the spring, was it February? I think it was with the widgets panel. They could do another one this summer and then have the October release be the third and final one for this year, or they might just be waiting until next year to start the 2 to 3 moments, as I've heard. So who knows regarding that? But expect more features rolling out to Windows 11 more often going forward, which is so funny. When Windows 11 was announced, they were like, "Oh, we're going back to one feature update a year," and everyone was like, "Yeah, amazing." But actually, behind the scenes, they're actually planning to increase the output of features, which was quite sneaky of them. They didn't tell us that at the time.
Well, still sounds good. Yeah, it's funny. I'm surprised moments is what they're going with.
I don't know if that's going to be public terminology. That's just what they're using internally. Yeah. But it could be public.
I was going to say, because you mentioned feature drop, and that's sort of the hip lingo. Yeah. To be used for all sorts of, or even just drops, I kind of hate it myself. The new sneakers drop on Tuesday. It's like, okay. But I think that makes a little bit more sense. Still looks kind of interesting. Hopefully this will address ongoing concerns. I wonder, what other changes they'll do with start menu and all that. It's funny just because A certain other Windows site was going off this week a little bit about how they hate the start menu. And I don't know if this is a generational thing or it's just like older people feel this way about start. I do find it funny how no matter what Microsoft does, it's not good enough for some people, or it'll never make them happy. Like, I guess according to some people, like the start menu peaked at what, Windows 95? I guess
The first one was the
want
best
that.
one.
Yeah, they want that in 2022. But it also needs to look awesome, which is vague and doesn't say anything. I don't know. You and I have gone over this before about how like I don't feel strongly on UI design. As long as I know what I'm doing and I can get the thing done, it's fine. I'm okay with the new start menu, but I don't use the start menu all that often anyway. Like I bring it up sometimes for search or my quick access, but I've barely even on my laptops redesigned the start menu, move my apps around and stuff like that. It's just easier just to type and launch my app, or do what I think a lot of people do is you pin your most frequently used stuff to the taskbar, and that's what you use 90% of the time.
I think a lot of the complaints come from people who were familiar with and used all of the features in Windows. I think it's easy to forget that probably 99% of Windows users aren't enthusiasts and rarely, if ever, touch the more. I'm going to put them in air quotes, complex functionalities of Windows. Most of them aren't. I wouldn't call them complex, but things like resizing the start menu, which is gone on Windows 11. That's the thing you was able to do in Windows 10. I think you could do it in Windows 7 and maybe Windows Vista. Don't think you could kind of do it in Windows XP. The point is, you used to be able to resize it, and now you can't. And I don't think that's a big deal. It's important to remember that the start menu, lots of Windows 11 isn't that they removed features, it's that they rebuilt these features from the ground up. So a lot of that functionality is not there because they just didn't put it back in. Some of that was because they didn't have time, and that's the nature of development. Yes, that sucks, and they should have waited until their sort of entire vision for this new start menu was complete. But they had deadlines to hit, so they cut things to make it so they could get there. The other thing is some of the stuff they just didn't want to add back. That's also very important to remember. Windows 11 is a more simplified version of Windows by design. That was kind of their goal. They wanted to take away a lot of the fluff, a lot of the complexities that previous versions of Windows had. Yes, I think they were aware that that might upset some power users. But again, I think 98% of the general population who uses Windows probably don't care and don't really notice.
Nope.
And that's what matters for Microsoft most. Power users will
not
complain.
When there's Chrome OS out there.
Right.
Like when Chrome OS is floating around and growing in certain segments, and then people come around and literally I saw a comment that said they should allow you to skin the menu, just have it like Linux. I was just like,
yeah, right.
Geez, dude, go touch grass. Seriously, go touch grass, because like you're just so out of touch with just how regular people are looking at PCs and computers these days, which it is the smartphone model. The most common computer that people use today is the smartphone, and therefore making the start menu more reflective of a smartphone is actually absolutely in line with how people are using devices this day. That's not to say you have to love it. I get it. If you look at Windows 11 and it makes you mad, I'm not be mad. It's fine. Everybody has their own personal opinions. I'm just saying, I don't think you're in the majority when it comes to this.
Yeah, for sure.
I think people need to get out of their comfort zones a little bit.
Yeah, and I've said I think Windows 11 is probably the best version of Windows ever. I really like the design and the vision for it, where it's going. The idea that they are trying to simplify common areas of the OS, I think is great. And yes, that does annoy power
stability.
Users. And stability. Yeah, I think when Windows 10 launched, it launched in an awful state from a stability perspective. It was very rough, and the UI was all over the place. It was very inconsistent with design. Lots of Windows 8 was still in the sort of first few versions of Windows 10. Windows 11 really got off on the right foot way more than Windows 10 did. Windows 10 sort of stumbled quite a bit for quite a while as well. I think the anniversary update was the first version of Windows 10 that was really solid and had got to a point where it felt like a version of Windows that you would want to sort of run. Windows 11 from the beginning, I thought, was at that point. I thought it was great. You sure it was missing a few bits here and there, but that wasn't anything that I thought was groundbreaking or show-stopping. Unless you are a power user, then of course some of that is gone. And my advice at the time was to wait. Maybe they'll bring some of it back. but I don't think they're going to bring most of it back. I think a lot of that is gone deliberately. A lot of those more complexities that Windows used to have, I think that's deliberately gone and isn't returning. Toolbars on the taskbar, don't think that's coming back. I really don't. Being able to group or ungroup taskbar icons, I think that's gone as well, and I don't think that's coming back. Stuff like that.
But and as Catherine mentions, no start menu folders is dumb, and that's something that they're working on, right? And
right, that falls into the other category. Is they just didn't have time to implement all the features they wanted to. They had a vision for this new start menu. They had a version 1 release and a version 2 release, and then they had features that they just said we're not going to implement this. And folders obviously wasn't that. Folders was in one of their versions, and clearly they had to have it in version 2 because they couldn't finish it in time for version 1. But being able to, I don't know. I genuinely don't know what people are missing from the start menu. I guess maybe the ability to turn off the recommended feed. Again, I think that's a deliberate...
Live tiles.
Yeah, or live tiles. Being able to turn off the recommended feed, I would actually, personally, would like to see that.
Sure.
And I think they've not done it for just on purpose, right? I don't think that was a thing where they were like, oh, we don't want... we could give them the option. I think they deliberately just went, we just don't want to give them the option. We want people to use that. We think it's useful. That may change in the future. This is the beauty of the Insider program as well, right? Feedback can influence Microsoft's thought process on a lot of this. It doesn't always. Sometimes Microsoft is set in stone on an idea and they will keep it that way. Other times, if enough people complain about it, things will change. And, the recommended feed not being a thing you can turn off, I think will eventually change, surely. Because it's not...
Sure.
It's not the end of the world for Microsoft if people do turn that off. And I think, again, most people probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
They just leave it there.
I think the recommended thing is that growing input of having AI in the operating system,
for
right?
Sure. Yeah.
That it's servicing stuff that you're more than likely interested in doing and continuing your work, which I think is where all this stuff is headed anyway. But I guess my takeaway is if you ever bring up should be more like Linux in a conversation about Windows, you lost the argument already.
Yeah.
Please don't say that. If you want something more like Linux, by all means, use Linux. I mean, Linux is great. I'm not even slamming it. Like, there is an awesome community around it, a lot of power users and people who love it. And by all means, like, Godspeed, go with it. But this idea to make Windows more like Linux is never going to be a thing. Like I said, not when Chrome OS is out there, not when Mac OS is out there, and the smartphone model of how people use computers is out there, driving the main consumer interactions for these devices. It just doesn't make sense. So
yeah, if you need to sort of figure out where Windows fits or where Windows kind of wants to lean towards, Mac OS or Linux, they're going Mac OS. Panos Panay's in charge. Like, of course, they're going to try and mimic the Mac OS experience more than Linux. But Windows will always be that middle ground. I feel like it always has been that middle ground.
Yes.
That middle ground between complex customizability and simplicity and sort of uniformity that Mac OS sort of offers. And Windows, historically, as I would say, on the spectrum, has been closer to Linux. Not by much, but it's certainly been a little bit more complex and more customizable. Mm-hmm. Windows 11 is, I think, the first real release of Windows that goes slightly the other way and takes away customization and complexity in favor of simplicity and uniformity.
And redundancy.
Yeah. A lot of the stuff that's gone from Windows 11 is just old features that barely anyone used. And I'm glad that they finally got around to doing that, because for the longest time, Microsoft would just build versions of Windows and then build on top of those versions of Windows and never pull anything from the new one that was introduced in the old one. And that's how redundancy happens and the OS gets bloated and ugly. And that's where all the design inconsistencies came from, is because they just kept building new versions of Windows without pulling out all the old stuff. And they're finally doing it, and I'm really glad they are.
Yep. Well, let's move on to Microsoft Edge. That got some new stuff. I believe it was in the Canary build that you covered. Why don't you explain what the changes are and why it's kind of a big deal and why it's exciting?
Yeah, so I don't actually run Edge Canary as my daily. I had to install this to check it out, but I got somebody on Twitter tipped me off to the latest Edge Canary build had a new flag in it called Experimental Appearance, or enabling the experimental appearance. Once you enabled that, you went into Settings, into the Appearance tab in Edge, and there were two new options: the ability to enable or disable the Mika blur effects in the title bar along the top, and the ability to enable a new rounded corners interface, which once both were enabled and you restarted Edge, brought a slightly tweaked interface along the top, which presented the Mika blur effect, which looks really nice. But in addition to that, it also introduced a new UI which separates the tabbed interface from the sort of address bar. and now all the tabs are in their own sort of rounded corners, rounded boxed corners, and it looks very similar. If you've seen Firefox, it looks similar to Firefox, and I actually really like it. I think it looks very modern, very clean, and like I said, this is just currently in the Canary channel right now. It's an experimental UI, they're calling it, so it may not ship. I think that's what that means. But hopefully, hopefully it does, because I really do like the look of this UI, and I'm really glad Microsoft is at least trying to detach itself from the Chromium look and feel. I think it's fair to say Edge looks like Chrome, and that was by design for a long time. They kind of wanted to almost trick people into thinking they were using Chrome, I think was the original goal. But Edge has been on the market for a long time now. I think everybody who knows about Edge knows that it's basically Chrome now, so they can start to push away from that UI and do their own thing, which I'm glad they're trying to do, because if you remember the old Edge UWP, that was a pretty app. I thought Edge UWP was probably the best looking browser on the market. Then it went away, and then Edge became a Chrome clone. Now they're finally looking at the UI and trying to maybe give it its own look again, and I'd like to see that happen, and this UI is sort of the start of that. But yeah, it has light mode and dark mode, and I think it looks really nice, and it sort of matches the Windows 11 UI quite a bit. It's very consistent, lots of rounded corners, and it looks really nice. So yeah, that's basically everything about that. Nothing huge there, but if you would like to try it out, yes, download Edge Canary, go to edge://flags, then search for experimental appearance. You'll see one option. There's a drop down, hit enable, restart, going to Edge settings, go to appearance, then you'll see the two new options to enable those UIs there.
I'm actually looking for it right now. I don't see it. Oh, there it is. I got it.
You got it? Yeah.
Enabled, restart. And now what do I do?
Head into Edge settings, the main sort of normal settings page. Go down to appearance, and then there should be two options: enable Mika effects, and then there should be like one that says enable rounded corners or something.
Rounded corners, yeah. Show Windows 11 visual effects in the title bar and toolbar preview. Yep. Use rounded corners for browser tabs preview. Restart. Bam! I've restarted. Looking good.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it does. It looks really nice. I'm curious. I didn't try it for vertical tabs. Maybe the UI.
That's where I was. I'm trying to see what of course, I have different color schemes going on. Actually, I think it looks pretty similar to what that is already.
Right. Yeah.
But I'll play around with it a little bit more. Yeah, I used to use Canary. Oh, they got the little sidebar thing now. I forgot about that.
Yeah, that's in Canary as well. You can turn it off though quite easily. I hope that's not something they ship on by default in the public version, because that annoys me. Don't put anything on the sides unless I configure that. Leave the sides alone. You can do everything you want to the top. Leave the sides alone.
Yeah, they may include that with the out-of-box experience when it's setting up.
Yeah.
If you want that. It's kind of neat. I mean, it looks good. So for people who don't know, it's a little sidebar on the right side. And it has really pretty icons. They're all colorful. And the first one is search, and it opens up a little Bing thing. There's discover, which is based on sort of, I believe, what you're like looking at. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at a web page on like a certain accessory or something like that, when you click this, it's going to give similar things to that. There's tools, which gives you calculator, unit converter, and the internet speed test, which is actually nice. I used to love their internet speed test. It also has games, which is pretty funny, including their surf game. So for those who do remember, the surf game used to be like a secret thing you go into the settings for. Now it's just like a quick access. And they also have Wordament. Wordament's still awesome. I still love playing Wordament. In 2048, remember that rage?
Yeah.
They also have a thing for Microsoft Office, and then they have Outlook, which opens up your emails. This is actually pretty useful, I'll be honest. Like, I think it looks pretty cool. But, I mean, you're right. I mean, it should be an option for users. But, yeah. I mean, it does... Again, people don't realize, or maybe they do, but, the browser, it's something like over 50% of Windows desktop usage is browser. Like, yeah. That is the app most people use. Even though your phone has a browser, how many of us have been on our phone trying to make a big decision about something, whether you're buying something really expensive? You're like, all right, let me go on the computer and really go in depth about this. So something about having on a computer, that bigger screen and more information allows you to sort of see a lot more. And so them adding these kind of features to Edge, I think actually makes a lot of sense, keeping you within the app experience, right? Instead of bringing up a calculator, going to start, hitting search, calc, bring it up and all that, you could just hit the little thing on the bar and have it right there. Yeah. I think it's pretty useful. and the games like surfing, the surf game, only nerds knew about that, right? Insiders knew about that kind of thing. But now it's like right there and right there, so people understand what it is. So I don't know, it's kind of cool stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, that's basically it for the new UI stuff. Hopefully that rolls out to production at some point. I don't think there's an ETA for it. Edge version 101 just rolled out to production. I don't think it was a huge release. I don't think there was anything noticeable in it. But yeah, hopefully at some point this year, this new UI becomes default and rolls out to the public. That'd be pretty nice.
And for those curious, Edge Canary, I used to use only Edge Canary, but then one time I did have like a show-stopping bug that like was causing problems, and I just went back to just relying on stable. But for the most part, Edge Canary is like everything works on it. Like there's nothing like radically weird, and they do get updated so frequently that usually the bug gets fixed pretty soon. So it's pretty safe to install, and you can, of course, install it alongside all the other versions of Edge. You can have all of them and just pick and choose and which one you want to as default. So it's kind of cool. All right. Let's do the environmental stuff.
Take it away, Dan.
So this was just kind of interesting just because, the right to repair movement is obviously getting quite big, and there's a lot of demand for this stuff. In October 2021, Microsoft was called out by a group called As You Sow, which is a weird name. They're a shareholder representative, and they filed a resolution against Microsoft basically saying you need to do more on this right to repair stuff. And Microsoft responded really quickly to it and actually outlined a 3-step plan to address this so much, and it satisfied As You Sow so much that they withdrew their resolution to this demand, basically. And those 3 points were complete a third-party study evaluating the environmental and social impacts associated with increasing consumer access to repair and determine new mechanisms to increase access to repair, including for Surface devices and Xbox consoles. The second one was expand the availability of certain parts and repair documentation beyond Microsoft's authorized service provider network. And 3, initiate new mechanisms to enable facilitate local repair options for consumers. So 2 of 3 of those, the last 2, the documentation and tools and new mechanisms, were actually kind of already addressed with the announcement a few months ago with iFixit. So if you don't remember, Microsoft teamed up with iFixit. They released official tools that people can buy, usually authorized providers, for repairing displays, opening up the devices and doing repairs, even separating the glue on the displays of something like a Surface Pro X or Surface Pro 8. And they released documentation and all this kind of stuff. And so, the tools are affordable. They're like $30. And so that's where that comes in. And they're trying to expand their authorized service providers, also known as ASPs. So the first part, though, was complete a third-party study evaluating environmental and social impact. So they did this now. It was completed. The report came out. We got early access to it through Microsoft. It's done by Oakden Hollins. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correct. They're an independent group, and they took on this task of looking at the environmental impacts of basically right to repair and all this kind of stuff. And some of this is self-evident, by which I mean, so the big choice is, what's the impact on the environment for giving people the ability to repair their devices versus throwing away the device and buying a new one? And some of that is sort of on its face. It should be obvious. But then again, when you consider manufacturing costs, shipping from China to the United States, and then from the US getting to the stores, and from the stores to you, and how you order that, whether you go pick it up yourself or it's mailed to you, there are that's not exactly a zero impact thing either, versus just tossing it into the trash. But still, the study, there's 3 main points that came out of it. So this, as I was just saying, the study found that compared to actually, let me give you the 3 bullet points. For the 7 devices studied, which includes Surface Pro 8 and Surface Book 3, Surface Laptop Studio, the study showed that repairing the product instead of device replacement can yield up to a 92% reduction in potential waste generation and GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. They also found greater than 20% of the net sustainability benefits of repair are determined by the transportation method and logistics for delivering devices to repair facilities, which I'll go explain in a second. And mail to repair services offer the lowest greenhouse gas emissions, even over long distances compared to other transportation methods, such as consumers driving their own vehicles to repair facilities. And that's kind of counterintuitive. But what they're saying is if you have a network of ASPs around the country, whatever country you're in, and you can mail out the device for repaired and have it sent back to you, that's actually better for the environment than you necessarily driving to an authorized service provider, which could be a short distance or even a long distance, which I found counterintuitive, but I think it has to do with the fact that like a FedEx truck is already out there doing rounds, and I see FedEx truck passing my house every day. So if he's going to stop by my house and grab my package, does that necessarily negatively impact the environment more than me driving? Technically, it would, because I drive a Tesla, but I'm in the minority there. And so the study goes on to talk about this and the details around that, how Microsoft is actually making a good effort. They got the tools now, and these tools can be sent to authorized service providers, including your local one, right? These aren't actually like Microsoft shops, of which there are none, but these are third parties that are certified to work on your Surface device. And so there's that aspect. And so that's the recommendations. They say, they want Microsoft to open up more ASPs so that the distance is shorter, obviously, for sending the stuff out. But it's pretty good. And so and then Microsoft set up a call with me and two people on the Microsoft team who were, let me get their names right here, Jason Brown, Director, NPI Design for Repair, and Jeremy McLean, Director, Customer Success and Experience at Microsoft. So these two guys oversee sort of the implementation of this repairability stuff on the Surface line, as well as, I presume, Xbox. And it's a really an interesting conversation. So, because this comes up a lot, especially if you go into forums talking about Surface, they rely heavily on glue, right? That's what, because people want this like sleek, slick design that's very minimalist and clean. And, Apple really kind of pioneered this, right? And the trade-off was that they weren't using screws. Instead, we're relying on glue. And that can help keep costs down, as well as make sure the device didn't fall apart, this kind of stuff. But the trade-off was, if you ever needed to open a device to, sorry, my voice is going again, to repair it, it was very difficult, if not impossible to do. And so you have people who have to basically throw out their devices. And there are two immediate consequences of that. One is like, sometimes you might buy a Surface, and in the first year, something goes wrong and the display needs to be replaced. And as Zach was pointing out before this call, you used to just go to a Microsoft store and they wouldn't repair it. They would just take it and give you a new one. And like that one would presumably go out for repair and then would be, resold as refurbished, which probably wasn't the best long-term play versus just repairing yours, which is kind of what Apple does, and giving it back to you. So that's the short term. The long term, of course, is this longevity issue, which is maybe you have a Surface Pro 4 and you still love it, you still use it, but now it's years on. And what's going to be the problem? Well, the battery is degraded, right? It doesn't hold as much charge anymore, and that becomes an issue. And there's no way to replace the battery, so you got to throw it out and get a new one, and that's not good for anybody. So they're working on both issues, or maybe even the display goes, right? Because the display or maybe you just crack the display years later and you want it replaced, even though it's out of warranty. So that's all like coming into play here. So starting in 2017, I thought this was interesting. Microsoft started working on these issues, and it's complicated because, as I said, they're trying to balance their design ID without compromising it while working into existing lines. And it does require them completely redesigning the device from the inside out to accommodate these kind of changes. And we first saw it with Surface Laptop 3, which then had the feet that were removable and had little screws in there, and then you can remove the keyboard deck. And what was cool was, if you never knew that, you couldn't tell the difference between Surface Laptop 3 and Surface Laptop 2, which is kind of the design goal. And if you look at something like Surface Pro 7, iFixit gave it a 1 out of 10 for repairability. Like, it's basically the worst score ever. But then you look at around the same time, they did Surface Pro X, right? And Surface Pro 7, let's be honest, was just the Surface Pro 6, which was just the Surface Pro 5. So they didn't redesign the chassis. So that was not until Surface Pro 8. But in between that, they did Surface Pro X. And Surface Pro X was a complete redesign, and that got a 6 out of 10 from iFixit. Even they were completely blown away and surprised. In fact, I think I have the quote here, which was kind of funny from them. Oh, can I find it? Oh, it was seen that Microsoft has placed at least 1 foot on the repairability train. Between this Pro X and the Laptop 3, we can hardly believe all the repair-focused changes they've made. So that was a big change for them. In fact, it actually beat the iPad for repairability, which was a first. And then you look at something like Surface Laptop SE, which you could completely strip that down with like 2 tools, like a screwdriver and just a pick to open it up. And that's needed for schools who want to do on-site repair. And then Surface Laptop Studio, I'll be posting a video with this about, they have a 22-minute video on tearing down Surface Laptop Studio because that has been built from the ground up to be serviceable and repairable, whereas Surface Book 3 absolutely was not. And so this is like, so they have progress to be made. You know, I asked about Surface Duo 2, which is not this, right? Surface Duo 2, if you try to take it apart, it's going to be very difficult, and you're going to have issues replacing the battery. I don't know if you can do that. And I asked about that. They said, yeah, you know, we need to try to balance innovation and design with safety, for one, and how the battery is placed and all that, as well as repairability. They did tell me, though, every new device coming out from here on out will have progression in repairability, and it will never have regression. So they're not ever going to have regression between generations in terms of repairability. It's something they're always going to be improving upon. And you see already some of this with replaceable SSDs. That's a small move, mostly for enterprise, but consumers also benefit from that ability as well, more so than a Mac, which is, you know, or even an iPad, which is really hard to change out the storage if you ever wanted to. But on a Pro X, you literally pop the door open, simple screw, and you can slide in a new drive, which is pretty awesome. So I think this stuff is actually really nice because, yeah, the idea of throwing a Surface into the landfill just because you can't replace the battery is very shameful. And, you know, you could argue that, well, the landscape has changed, right? Because in Europe and the United States, even right to repair is gaining momentum in legislatures, and there's legislation coming that's probably going to start enforcing some of this. But Microsoft is also doing it because being environmentally friendly is preferable. And the study proves that, you know, giving these tools to ASPs and having someone mail out their device is better for the environment than obviously trashing the device, or even a consumer driving their own device to an ASP. So there's still a lot of room for improvement, but I'm glad to see that, you know, Microsoft is kind of getting ahead of this while not sacrificing what we love about Surface, which is this, you know, clean minimalist design.
You know, you mentioned the Laptop Studio. I find it that teardown video is really interesting, and I didn't even notice this was a thing. But yeah, mine here. There's actually a sticker that runs around the sort of underside of it, which covers up screws. You would never be able to tell that was a sticker.
Yeah.
It looks seamless. It's incredible. It's almost as if they designed a new like paper technology to make, because like you can't feel any of the bumps where the screws are. Like it just feels part of the device. And when I watched that video and they're like, okay, now you need to peel up this sticker that goes around I was like, what sticker? Mine doesn't have that. But no, yeah, there's a sticker there, and it's just insane at how good they've become at sort of hiding that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's impressive. And you think about the same innovation that goes into making Surface is now being applied by the same people to making it repairable.
Yeah.
And they're doing it in some very creative and interesting ways. And, you know, so what was funny about this, I brought it up to them too, because on the same day I was talking to them, it was announced Apple has a new home repair kit for the iPhone that you can rent for $45. And that sounds interesting. It's 79 pounds. I want to repeat that. It's a 79-pound repair kit that shows up in 2 crates that are wheeled to you. And what's funny about that is, of course, Apple actually does have a good repair policy. Like if you live near an Apple store, of which there are plenty, you can actually bring your device in and have it repaired. But in case you don't want to go down that route, or your device is out of warranty, and I don't know, you want to do it yourself, Apple will send you 79 pounds of equipment to work on your phone, which I guess sounds good, except let's talk about environmental impact now. So what's the impact of mailing around the country 80 pounds of materials versus you sending out a less than 1 pound device for remote repair? That's ridiculous. I'm surprised Apple is kind of doing this, but I almost feel like they're doing it like, oh, you want to do this yourself?
Right.
Here you go, you jerk. Because who wants 80 pounds of equipment to work on this? So I don't know if they're just being, sarcastic almost with this response, but that can't be good for the environment, which is odd coming from Apple. But, Microsoft seems to be making more progress here than Apple does, which is funny because, I guess Apple gets around it because they have their stores, which if you break your iPad or something cracks, you could bring it in and they will replace it. And that is a good thing, right? Samsung is trying to replicate that, but without as much success. But then when it comes to the right to repair and, maybe you want to take it to another dealer, an independent dealer, Apple's been standing in the way of that for a very long time. They're only now starting to come around to it. And it seems like for them, it feels more like they're doing it because they know legislation is coming versus they're doing it because they want to be consumer friendly. And, but they're not making, I don't know if they're really making their devices as friendly and repairable as Microsoft is. So.
Yeah. So you mentioned that they said that all of the future products going forward will have progression towards repairability and all of that stuff. So I guess that basically confirms that the next Surface Go and the next Surface Studio will have to have design changes, right? Because the current versions are not repairable. The Surface Studio to an extent is a little bit more repairable, but the Surface Go certainly isn't. The Surface Go is a smaller Surface Pro 7, and that had terrible repairability scores. And so this next Surface Go will have to have some sort of design change to be better at repairability. So that's interesting. And I'll be really interested to see how they go about the Surface Duo, because what they said is correct. They have to find a balance between innovation or trying new things and making it repairable. Sometimes a new design idea might not be very repairable.
Right.
And
that's like Surface Duo.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, they have to make that choice. Do they want to go down this path of cool design and use case, but can't repair it, or do they just not do that device because it's not repairable? I think that would be a real shame if that's the decision they end up making for an idea. There's always a balance to be had, but I feel like if there's a design that they can come up with that they just absolutely cannot make repairable, in quotes, I still think they should at least try it because I want to see what it's like.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like that's where they're at right now. That said, they're attempting to. So, with the Duo 3, I expect it. They're going to see what Duo 2 what the points of failure are. I asked about that too. They're like the main points of failure that they're saying is display and then usually keyboard. They said batteries don't typically fail. It's just long term they degrade, and so that's where that comes in. But with the Duo, I imagine the display and outer glass cracking is going to be definitely the top repair thing, followed probably by the USB port still, right? Which is a way better than on Duo 2 than 1, but it still can be cracked. I'm not sure too much can actually be done about that considering how thin it is, and they can just try to reinforce it as much as possible.
Well, they could change
when
the
it comes to the
material
display.
To make it
so when it comes to the outer glass, you and I have been both pretty vocal about maybe not do the outer glass.
Yeah.
It feels great, feels premium, no doubt about it, but could you use a polycarbonate or another material? We're seeing ballistic nylon is being used now by companies. There's even the fake leather is being used. There's
Alcantara.
Having either a ballistic nylon exterior would be very resistive to external damage, as well as giving a tactile feel, as well as I think the part of the problem with having all the glass look on the Duo, despite it looks good, don't get me wrong, for visual appearance and aesthetics, it's amazing looking, but in terms of functionality, the Duo feels, especially with like my fake leather skin on here, feels very much like a little black book, like a little address book or something like that. And so using a more cloth or ballistic nylon external material helps reinforce that this is a little digital journal, which I think is a better analogy. But there are challenges there too, right? If they want to make the pen rechargeable and all this kind of stuff. But I am curious to see what they do with, Duo 3 in all sorts of ways. Do they go dual screen, single screen? What changes they make? We don't know, so we'll see what happens. But I think this is all good stuff from Microsoft. I think it's, they're very big on the environmental train these days, and this is an interesting report. And they're fulfilling their obligations. They said they would have it done by May 1st, and they got it out like 2 days early or something like that. So good on them. All right. Speaking of Laptop Studio, dynamic refresh. You did this story. Tell us what the deal is with the dynamic refresh, and compared to what we had before.
Yeah. So this is actually a thing that I heard about before the Laptop Studio was announced. Back when it was sort of rumor mill central, when we were talking about what we're expecting for the next Surface Book, I had heard that whatever it is will have a higher dynamic refresh rate of up to 120 hertz. And then we found out that Windows 11 would support a feature called dynamic refresh rate, which is basically what it does is it will scale up and down your refresh rate from 60 to 120, depending on what you're doing on your device. If you're inking, it will jump up to 120, or if you're moving around a window or something, it will jump to 120, or scrolling in Edge or Word. But if you're just sitting there reading a static sort of page or whatever, it will drop to 60 in an attempt to save battery life. This isn't new tech. Phones do this all the time. Phones can actually do more than that. They can go all the way down to 1 hertz, up to 120 usually. But yeah, Windows has a dynamic refresh rate from 60 to 120. And the Laptop Studio launched, but it didn't launch with the dynamic refresh rate support. Same with the Surface Pro 8. I'd heard the Pro 8 would also have a dynamic refresh rate. It launched, didn't have it. And we actually asked Microsoft, and they were really coy about it. They were like, we don't know what we're talking about, which was weird. But yes, this week, if you're in the Insider Program, Dev Beta, and I think Release Preview as well, a firmware update rolled out on the Laptop Studio, which did enable dynamic refresh rate, which is now something you can go into settings, go to settings, display, advanced display, and then in there you'll see an option for refresh rate. In that drop down, there is now an option for dynamic, and that will scale between 60 and 120 hertz. And I've only had it for a few days. I've not really noticed too much different, to be honest. I will say that the animation for things like the start button operate in 60 when in dynamic, which makes it feel a little less fluid. But yeah, I think what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to try and save battery life where possible, because once it scales to 60, you're not powering that display as much, and so therefore it can save a little bit of juice. And I haven't really been paying attention to it too much, so I've not really noticed anything, but I assume it's doing its job and will save you. I don't think it'll be much battery life, maybe 30 minutes, an hour at most, but yeah. It's nice that they're finally rolling that out in preview form, and hopefully it shows up on the Surface Pro 8 at some point, because I think the Pro 8 could do a bit more than the Laptop Studio. The battery life on the Laptop Studio at full blast 120 has always been fine for me. I can get through, 6 hours maybe. On the Pro 8, battery life is significantly worse, and that's because it's a higher resolution display, and it's 120, and it has a smaller battery than the Surface Laptop Studio. So dynamic refresh rate on the Pro 8 will definitely be welcome whenever that decides to show up.
Yeah, and of course the next level, and people ask about this all the time, is can it go below 60 hertz? Since we're starting to get that on smartphones now, and obviously the desire there is, if you're looking at a static web page and just reading or stuff like that, yeah, why do you need even 60 hertz? But unfortunately, that is a hardware restriction at this point. It's going to require, again, I'm going to hammer this home, right? So I'm sure Samsung could create a display that does this, right, physically. It's going to be expensive because they haven't made it yet. And then what size do they make it in? What aspect ratio, right? So then they have to do all that and then factor in the cost of it. And will there be customers who buy it en masse to keep the pricing low? Because then they're going to have to reconfigure their factory floors. And there's a lot that goes into this. And so we will, I'm sure, eventually see it. In fact, what we're starting to see now, which I'm even kind of surprised about, is 120 hertz OLED displays. And I mentioned already how the Lenovo Yoga 9i does 90 hertz with OLED, which was a surprise to me because I didn't even know that was a feature. And until I saw it, I was like, oh, that's okay. I didn't know that was even possible on this yet. And now you're going to start to see 120 hertz coming out from some other companies. I can tell you Lenovo is kind of going big on the 90 hertz and 120 as well. Like just how they kind of shifted everything to 16 by 10. They're kind of going in on this, and it's because these displays are becoming available for mass production at this point, so it's an option for them to do. So I think eventually we'll see displays come out that go even below 60 hertz and save even more in battery life, but it's going to take a little while to get there. But for now, having this dynamic and variable refresh rate is going to be, a good option to, as you mentioned, basically help save battery life because, doubling the refresh rate on a display, it's battery intensive. It's just why gaming laptops typically get poor battery life. They're pushing like 300 and over 300, which is just insane to me. But gamers are gamers, so there you go. Very cool. My thing, I just want the new Pro X with the SQ3, some 5G, 120 hertz display.
That's the point. We should mention the Nuvia.
Oh, the Nuvia?
Yeah,
that's a good point. So real quickly, Qualcomm had its earnings call this week. I didn't even follow its earnings really, but during an investor call, they were asked about Nuvia. As a refresher, Qualcomm bought Nuvia for $1.4 billion. Nuvia was a small company that was focused on building basically ARM processors, but they're not ARM because ARM is a licensed thing, but basically similar type non-x86 processors. Nuvia was founded by a couple of people who used to work at Apple who designed the A1 chips found in iPhones, and the A1s then bled into turning into the M1s. So the very people who created that for Apple then split off from Apple and created their own company. And there was a controversy around that. There's lawsuits going back and forth, but it is what it is. But then Qualcomm came and bought them. So Qualcomm is now going to be using Nuvia chips for its really high-end stuff. They'll continue to license ARM chips from ARM Limited and design things like the Snapdragon 8cx Gen 3 and probably a Gen 4, right? And that'll be a different tier. So the question was, when can we get these Nuvia chips, which are supposed to go head-to-head with the M1s? And so they're going to be in hands to OEMs in late 2022, which was previously announced, and that's still on track. And then they were supposed to be in consumer devices in 2023. That was the last time that they mentioned anything. This time on the call, they clarified and said late 2023 for consumer devices. So basically when they'll be on store shelves. So that seems like a long time. Obviously, it's a long time away, but ACX Gen 3 technically hasn't launched yet, right? That's coming out literally in the next couple of weeks, and we'll have Pro X probably in the fall launching. So that would give even like the Pro X a 1-year life cycle, basically, with that processor. But OEMs will get these new chips. Don't forget, these are new. They're not ARM now. They're ARM-ish, right? But there will be some changes in drivers that need to be developed and tested for them. We don't know all the ins and outs about the architecture, what they're going to look like, how they're going to work, and all this. OEMs will have to begin building out for that, and then also start designing the hardware around its capabilities, right? What's the battery life going to be? Do we need a big battery, small battery? What's the heat? Do we need fans? And then they're going to be building out these devices and testing. And then also Qualcomm needs to start mass producing them, which chip yields for a new chip design is always small, which is why 12th gen Intel chips are just rolling out now. And it's like a staggered thing, right? That gets us into the XPS 13 Plus. We'll talk about in a few minutes. So as those chip yields increase, production goes up, we'll start to see this stuff more. So I think that like kind of almost year between the things, I know it's unfortunate, but it actually makes sense for timing. And like I said, you have the ATX Gen 3 will be out there. So can they beat the M1? In what year are they beating the M1?
Right. Because the M2 is coming.
Sure. I kind of think that they'll be very competitive with both. But then again, I also want to shift that focus because that's where the mainstream media and a lot of nerds are going to be like focused on. And it's not really the competition. I know in some ways it is because Apple's setting the benchmark. But the real competition is Intel and AMD.
Yeah.
How do these chips compare to those companies' top tier mobile processors? That's the competition because that's what OEMs are going to have to choose. HP may want the M2, it'll never have it, so what's the point anyway? And I don't believe still consumers are like, should I get a MacBook Pro for the first time, or should I get something from Lenovo? Like, I don't think some people make that decision, but usually you're in one camp and you're like, I like Windows. I want the latest from Windows. And if you're a Mac user, you're never switching to Windows anyway. So I think those two camps, are kind of solidified. We're not seeing much shift between the two. But it's going to be interesting to see. So hopefully we'll hear more about that stuff in the coming months. But yeah, we still got a while before these Nuvia chips hit the market. But like I said, this stuff is a technology. You got to think the long game here, not the short term. So
yeah.
All right, speaking of, I guess, XPS 13 Plus. So this was kind of rumored to be coming around March. That's what Dell told me when this first was announced back in January. But now it's, then I heard it was going to be late April. And sure enough, late April it is. So the XPS 13 Plus is now available for purchase. Starting price, I believe, is $12.99. Although there's a developer edition for $12.49, but it runs Linux. So good luck with that. If you don't remember why the XPS 13 is so special, XPS 13 Plus, it's a complete new, very radically redesigned XPS 13. And I should caveat that, like, for those who want a more traditional XPS 13, there's Dell has you covered. Don't worry. There's more coming, right? But the 13 Plus needs to be thought of as sort of this tip of the spear in terms of design for their flagship product. And it's really cool. It has a very, edge-to-edge infinity display, thinnest bezels ever. You can get up to a 4K OLED. It's, of course, touch, and all that kind of stuff. It has quad speakers, 2 of which are below the keyboard, like how Microsoft does it. Again, that's not trivial at all, but now you don't get visible speaker grills, which is always awesome. The keyboard itself is edge to edge. It goes right up to it. And the keys themselves are like these kind of like blocky keys with no gaps between them, with ample travel. The 2 controversial things, it actually should be 3. There's no headphone jack, so that's dun dun dun. But there's also the function keys, which are capacitive and not so they don't depress. They didn't do that to be cute or coy. They did it to, they're not trying to be Apple here. So these keys don't transform. It's not an LED strip where they adapt to the program you're using, which then, of course, no developer actually ever really adopted even on Mac OS. And they don't run a co-processor, which would crash, which is that was the big issue with the Macs. It's like, It's not that it had that bar. It was just that bar would sometimes freeze and would stop working, which in the computer would be fine. The computer was running, but it had an actual little ARM processor in there, and you need to restart the computer to get it back working, which is kind of weird that your function keys crashed. So that's not this. This is literally like a strip, and it's their LED lit, and their function keys or media keys. In the software, you can change the preference, which is the first press, and which is the function key and hold press. They don't change dynamically. And they didn't do this, like I said, to be like, oh, we're going to be really cool. They did it because by not having those keys pressed down into the chassis, they're able to save on height and could put in basically bigger fans and improve the thermals of the device, things like I believe it has a vapor chamber, to put that in. So every millimeter counts on these designs. And so they were able to save space there. So that's why that exists. I don't think it's a big deal, but we'll see how it is with people. Again, 99% of laptops out there do have pushable function keys. If you prefer that, go buy the other 99% of laptops. I think it's okay once in a while to have a radically redesigned laptop that pushes, how this stuff looks. The other controversy is it does have a haptic trackpad, which is I think is awesome. So it doesn't move. It's not mechanical. It's all software based. But this is unlike anything we've seen before. It's just blended into the entire keyboard deck. So the entire keyboard deck is glass, and the area below the space bar is the trackpad, as you would anticipate. But there are no lines demarcating where the trackpad begins and ends. And this has blown people's minds. I've actually used the XPS 13 Plus for just a few minutes, and I don't have it here with me yet. I could tell you, you'll be okay. The brain is very good with figuring out stuff intuitively and from muscle memory. But if you use a keyboard on a laptop and you place your hands where they're supposed to be, which is on the F and the J keys, your index fingers, and then your thumbs naturally fall in the middle, that's where the trackpad will be. And it's a large trackpad, as all touchpads are these days. So there's plenty of space. You don't need to know where it ends and begins. You'll figure it out. What's going to happen, you'll start moving your finger around and you'll eventually see where the beginning and end is, and your brain will start to memorize where that is. But the action of when you start moving your finger on it is just going to work.
But Dan,
there's no
Dan,
right and
what problem does it solve?
right, exactly. And then there's also no visible right left keys, but you already don't have that. Like that's the other thing, right? On trackpads today, there's no visible right and left click areas. Yet you figure it out, don't you? But what's cool about haptics is the fact, one, it doesn't move, so it's just simulated, and it's going to be this, but it feels like it's moving. It's really bizarre. And this is a new technology. I don't know who's actually doing the haptics here, so I'm still trying to figure that out. But because it's all software, even the zones for the right and left click should be able to be resized if they want that to be, because it's just software based anyway. So it should be pretty cool. I think people, I know it blows people's minds with the trackpad. I'm telling you, I think it's going to be fine. I think this is just really overblown. I think most of you don't really look at your trackpad while you're using it. If you do, maybe you also look at your keyboard while you're typing, which is, sorry. So I don't think it's going to be a big deal. But it's running the Intel 12th Gen P series chip. And that's also interesting because that's a 28-watt chip. So this is going to be the most powerful XPS 13 yet. It sits between the H series and the U series. So it should get a lot of really good performance, RSXE graphics, and all that kind of stuff. So I think it looks wild. I think it looks a lot of fun. Yeah. The keyboard, when I tried it, felt great. I think it looks fantastic. And Dell's been pretty good so far with nailing XPS design. Like, when was the last time they redefined and made a new XPS design that they later recanted on and didn't do for a second generation? Right. It's pretty rare. So I feel like they'll kind of do a good job with this. But yeah, Zach, are you going to pick one up, or are you waiting for reviews?
I'm waiting for reviews. I would, if I didn't have, or if I was still using an old laptop, this would probably be my next laptop. But since I have a Surface Laptop Studio, it's hard for me to also buy this as well. There's just so many good choices on the market. It's a shame. Yeah. I do hope, to vet as well, I do hope that they bring this. If they brought this design to the XPS 15, I'd probably be more open to that. The 13 inch is too small for me now. I've decided 13 inches is too small.
Sure.
I need.
Although this is like 13.4 or something like that. So
sure, yeah, but I think like a 15-inch model would be probably more up my street.
Sure. And obviously, I think that's, if this proves to be a hit, they get good feedback and all that. I think them doing an XPS 15 Plus is totally in the cards, right? Yeah. They got to already be thinking about doing that, because why wouldn't they? Those two devices are kind of like sister devices. So, but right now, like I said, tip of the spear. My only downside is it doesn't have 5G as an option. Like, Dell's still very
anti-LTE,
shy.
Yeah.
When it comes to LTE and 5G and devices, they're putting it into some of them, but not the ones that I want. Where HP is just like, I didn't even realize the Spectre X360 14 finally did get an LTE 5G option, which was something I put as a negative in my original review, but it turns out they now offer that version, and that's HP. HP gives you that option, and that's why I kind of like what they're doing. I wish Dell needs to do. It's funny because Dell, they've been very successful. They're the only company last quarter, I believe, according to IDC, they gained 6% market, where everyone else lost. They even beat Apple in terms of gaining market. So they're doing stuff right. So I'm not really, I guess I shouldn't be telling them what to do. But they don't do things like ARM yet. They haven't done an ARM. We don't know their stance on foldables. They're not big on LTE. So they're kind of
they're very conservative. They're very We'll only do it when we're like. Yeah, they just don't experiment much.
It's funny because when they do, it'll be something like this device, and if it works, this device will look like this for the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
But that's what makes them kind of cool too, because you pick up an XPS 15 today, it's still like, damn, or even the XPS 17. It's like the devices, they create designs that just become timeless for a very long time. So. It's nice to have them, I guess, as that option. As far as when to expect the review, good question. Don't know. I noticed historically Dell tends to release the devices out into the wild, wait to get feedback and fix any issues with production, make sure everything's under control, patch any major bugs, and then they give them to reviewers. That's how I typically see them do things versus like giving it to people right away. Like Lenovo is like, hey, this isn't even out yet. You can review it now. I'm like, okay. So very different approaches, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and I know I'm bad with reviews in terms of timing, but I swear I'll get this one done quickly because I know there's demand for it. So, whew. All right, Zach, we're nearing the end. What's your timing look like?
I'm good.
Okay?
I'm good for now. Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So real quickly, I guess let's talk about Microsoft earnings, which now can I find? I have way too many tabs open, by the way.
Close your tabs, Daniel.
If I might need them. Wow, I can't find.
I have the headline here, so let me read the headline while you look for it. So, FY22 Q3 earnings: Microsoft reported 49.4 billion in revenue, which I believe beat Wall Street expectations. This was an increase of 18%. Operating income was 20.4 billion, which increased 19%. Net income was 16.7 billion and increased 8%. And diluted earnings per share were $2.22 and increased 9%. Did you find it, Dan?
I found the Surface one.
Okay, you go for that.
All right, so Microsoft's More Personal Computing org brought in 14.5 billion this quarter, and revenue is up 13%, driven mainly by Windows commercial licenses. Surface revenue is up 13%, and Windows OEM is up 11%. And that 13% is pretty high, actually. And I think Apple's earnings yesterday said something similar, that their Macs were also up like around 11% or something like that. So I'm actually surprised that 13% was kind of higher than even I expected. Mostly because there are still ongoing challenges with supply chains and getting stuff out there. Surface Laptop Studio still isn't like widely available in many Surface markets, for instance. But they seem to be doing good enough and being ahead of the curve. And I think a lot of this is driven by commercial. Commercial still doing the one we're starting to still see demand outpace consumers. And this is another question I had regarding Apple, whether they can maintain, because Apple doesn't have the enterprise angle really with its Macs that Windows does. But overall, it's still doing pretty well. I didn't get to read the predictions for next quarter, their guidance on that, so I'll have to catch up on it. But overall, Surface is, we should mention Surface doesn't report earnings in billions anymore. So if you're wondering why we didn't give you a number, it's just % year-over-year change compared to the last time, which is still good. But overall, Microsoft beat expectations on Wall Street again. And that's also noteworthy because Google had a rough week with earnings. I believe YouTube was down. I didn't follow these completely. Amazon also got hammered because its growth in AWS was in single digits. It's the second quarter they've had that. And for the first time in 15 years, I think AWS has only grown in double digits, or single digits. So they seem to be sort of slowing down growth, where Microsoft still seems to be doing very well for Azure. And then Apple did mostly well. Apple did, again, I think better than expected. iPhone 13's demand for it has been high, although as we mentioned previously, not for the iPhone mini, which is being discontinued. Apparently a report came out this week that only 3% of all iPhones sold are the iPhone mini, so they're just going to get rid of that one. Yeah, I know you and I both have one, and it's just like, that's because you and I use it as a secondary device, so we want the smallest iPhone.
Yeah.
But I get it. If you're a primary user, the rumor for the iPhone 14 is it'll be 6.1 inch and up to 6.7 inch, and they'll have 4 versions there for that. And Mac is doing pretty well. The services are doing well for them as well. iPads went down, I think, by 2%, which gets back to, I think, if you're like an Apple fan and you're in that ecosystem, like you may have bought a new MacBook or a new Mac for your desktop, and maybe you upgraded your iPhone, and then you looked at your wallet and little moths flew out of it because you don't have anything left. And you realize, wait, I have a 6.7 inch iPhone and I have a new MacBook Pro. Do I need a tablet in between these two things? Probably not, right? That's always been the threat to the iPad is like the iPhones get so big because they run the same OS basically.
Yeah.
They're a little bit different now, which is nice, but they're still kind of the same. But it gets, it doesn't surprise me that tablets are starting to sort of fade into the background as laptops and phones, again, become the primary input methods that people want for getting stuff done. I think the bigger issue for Apple was that they said the next quarter is going to be kind of worse for them than this quarter in terms of supply and demand and all that kind of stuff. So that's where they got hit on the stock market, unfortunately. But Microsoft doing quite well. Everything looks really nice. Oh, and I got DHL here delivering something from Huawei. Zach, I believe this is your monitor.
It's by my monitor.
Yeah.
He means his monitor that I just really like.
Yes, which is the Mate display. If you guys haven't seen that, it's 3x2?
Yeah, 3x2
display, aspect
4K
ratio,
plus.
28-inch.
The only downside, 60 hertz. I wish it was higher.
Right. Yep. Yeah, it's not a gaming display, but you're right. We've only seen the high refresh rates for gaming displays typically, or hybrids, but not really. This isn't an ultra wide. This is a square almost. But it does look really nice, and it'll be on my doorstep. Apparently now. I shout out to DHL, by the way. DHL is pretty awesome at delivery. I should point out, I did put it on Twitter here. If you're watching the podcast live, hopefully you can see this. This is the Huawei P50 Pocket. They're foldable clamshell, flip phone,
it's
basically.
It's a beautiful phone.
It's, listen, I know people have opinions on Huawei, but their hardware is still just blowing, and they're beating Samsung. So the big deal, if you can't see this because you're listening to the podcast, this is like a Z Flip 3, except it doesn't have a gap where it closes. It is completely flat. Like they figured it out somehow. It also has better cameras. Specifically, it has a better telephoto on it, and it does really well. It also has this like really round exterior display, which is not as useful as the Z Flip, but it does give a really neat aesthetic appearance. I don't know if you can see, Zach. Like, do you see that exterior display?
Yeah, like a little watch. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, now watch when I flip it around.
Oh, cool. That's nice.
It like follows. Yeah, it's just like kind of clever design. It's expensive. It's like $1,500. You have to get it imported, and the big thing, of course, it doesn't run any Google software. So, so if you rely on Google, it's a pain. Even hacking it on there is not recommended. But I'll point you to, if you want, I'm not reviewing this phone. I'm using it in conjunction with some of their other PC stuff because they made them all interactive, like what Samsung and Apple does. But if you want to go watch a review, Michael Fisher, aka Mr. Mobile, did a really good video on reviewing it, and he really lays out all the pros and cons of the device better than I can. But what was interesting is, and this is important for our audience, if you don't like Google and you're just against Google, and like but you kind of you don't want Apple either, this phone actually might be a good option because sure, it has like the Chinese stuff on it, but you can get it works for your market, so you can put English on it, right? It's not a problem. It doesn't have 5G because that is also technology that's blocked off to Huawei. But it gets 4G, which is funny. But you can put on basically Microsoft apps on this and just use that. You can use Edge, you can use Outlook, you can use OneNote, you can use Office. Like you can just make this a Microsoft phone without the Google stuff and use it that way. In which case, it's not a bad option. But I think it's just more impressive. Just their design is it's a gorgeous looking phone. Really nice job with them.
On the politics side of that, real quick, what does the future hold for Huawei? Because will the US give this thing up eventually? Be like, yeah, actually, you can come back and use all of our tech, or are they just locked out of Google and American 5G providers forever? Like, is that?
I think two things probably need to happen. Relations between China and U.S. need to get better regarding technology. From China's perspective, they're saying we're doing this to Huawei because we're protecting Apple and even maybe Samsung, right? We don't want China to become like this dominant technology company or country, because right now the world's tech is mostly based in the United States, right? Samsung kind of being the exception there, but that's China's perspective. The U.S. is like, Huawei is too closely linked to the Chinese governments, with people coming in and out from government into the company and vice versa, and we don't trust them for spying. which I understand. At the same time, there's never been a consumer Huawei device that's been found to have like backdoors or spying or anything. If any, like there were security flaws I think found in some of their routers, industrial routers for 5G, which like the UK is using, but there was nothing. It looked like bugs, like in terms of just like there was nothing. It looked like it was nefarious and that was trying to be hidden as like a Trojan kind of thing. It was just like, oh, there was just like what routers do. Like routers get patched. It doesn't mean like when you have your I don't know what's a major router company. I can't Linksys. If you have a Linksys router, yeah, like, and there's a security patch. You shouldn't be like, oh, yeah, Linksys got caught because they were spying on me. Like, no, it's just probably bad programming. So I feel bad for Huawei in that sense because Huawei's hardware is so good, like that it was the only company that I saw as like really challenging Samsung in that space, and in some cases beating Samsung. And they were doing all sorts of like crazy stuff, like with the Mate 20X, So like. Now we're not getting that, and of course their laptop stuff is really impressive. The Mate Pro X, so, and they have now the MateBook E, which I do have for review, is their tablet and all this kind of stuff. So it's a shame. I think until they can demonstrate to whatever satisfaction U.S. government wants, which may not be something doable, I'm not sure anything's going to change. Right now, they're basically focusing on their own operating system, going with their own chips where they can. But it's tough. It's really hampered them. I went to the Huawei campus, so yeah, I'm biased here, I guess. I've never been paid by Huawei, though. So I can disclose that. But I did go visit them, and their campus was absolutely bonkers and where they were going with technology. It's China, though, but that's – listen, when the United States moved all its companies to China and all its work there and decided to make everything in China, don't be surprised when China turns around and goes, all right, we're going to be a major industrial leader now. And like, that's what happens when you build them up, I don't know. We'll see what happens. Real quickly, do you have time for the Twitter?
Yeah, let's go. Let's do it.
All right. So quickly, obviously, Elon Musk bought Twitter, or at least is in the process of buying Twitter. Yeah, still hasn't completely gone through yet. Probably won't happen for another 6 months. I'm not one of these people that has reacted hysterically on Twitter about this. My take is like, you don't like Twitter? Leave it. It's a service. I don't define my life based on Twitter and I have a large account. I have like almost 77,000 followers. I forgot what it is, 74,000. Like I have a lot of people. I'm verified. Like I have all that kind of stuff, but whatever. It's Twitter. Like I believe in the free market. If Twitter stinks so bad, let's create a secondary option and compete with them and do things better, which is typically how things work in our society that people seem to have forgotten. And I'm addressing both people on the left and the right on this because the right has been freaking out forever that Twitter's enforcing their own terms of service to however they please, which is the privilege of having your own private company, by the way. So go form your own social network. Well, they did. There's Getter, there's True Social. Why aren't they using it? Well, because part of the fun on Twitter, especially for people on the right, is not just talking amongst themselves. It's dunking on people on the left. So if AOC is not on Getter or True Social, there's no fun because now you can't go tell her how stupid she is for whatever tweet she made. And so that's why people on the right stick on Twitter. And that's really kind of lame that's where social networks are and how this technology works. It should be like, well, make Getter or True Social so good that people on the right are like, this is just preferable. In fact, Donald Trump, to his credit, has said, I'm not coming back to Twitter. I'm going to use True Social, which is his, he technically owns it, I guess. It's part of his company, which I think would probably make better business sense, but we'll see if he sticks with that. And of course, people on the left are the same way. It's like, if you want to leave Twitter, then, or you hate Elon Musk, even though he hasn't done anything yet on Twitter, then just leave Twitter. Then who cares? You don't need to announce it to the world. Just stop using it. I didn't tell people I stopped using Instagram. And I may go back to Instagram. I don't know. It wasn't an ideological decision necessarily, more just I just got tired of Instagram. But I didn't announce it to the world, I'm taking a stand.
I don't see why you would leave a platform based on who owns it. Like, unless they were the devil and you really just couldn't support that business, then sure. But Elon Musk is just he's a very he's a character almost, and you either like him or you hate him. And don't get me wrong, like his buyout of Twitter is certainly politically driven, but not in a negative way. I don't think it's certainly. He seems to be a bit tied up on. He thinks Twitter's very left leaning, and he wants to bring it back so it's neutral. That seems to be where he sort of stands on this. He wants it to be open to each side, which it sounds great, right? I think people are worried that because I think Elon's slightly right leaning, isn't he? And I think people are more worried that he's going to try and bring it more leaning.
He's sometimes his own worst enemy, right? And I attribute this sometimes to his Asperger's, because I had a good friend of mine who has Asperger's, and I had a lot of conversations about, his interactions and his ability to be social. Because I was, as a scientist at the time, I was like very interested in it, and as a friend, I was interested in it too, because I seen the best, the good and the bad with it, right? The good is this guy, my friend, his name is Brett. Like he's freaking genius. He was so smart, and like he was just good with everything he could just put his mind to. He's like Elon Musk. He just became a master of it and would just go like so into it and just stay up for hours. And like his brain just worked on a different level than most people's. The downside was he had trouble interacting socially, in the sense that he could like just be so blunt with people that he would crush your feelings. He didn't mean to hurt you, but there's no emotion in what he's saying. And so he has to figure out how to navigate that. And sometimes he would lose his temper over something because of the way he had trouble expressing himself. And I find Musk is the same way, with the way his tweets are his own like dumb things. Like he doesn't help his cause when he's like, oh, the left, the left hates themselves and all this kind of stuff. And then kind of gives a pass to the right. Like, I'm not saying like you need to believe either or, believe whatever you want. But if his job as CEO is not to inflame his own audience, whether he agrees with them or not, it's to present yourself as being neutral. And he himself is not coming off neutral in his things. Yeah. I also just have a problem with him taking over Twitter, simply because I don't think we should rely on billionaires as problem solvers for the world.
I was going to say, it sends the wrong message that a billionaire can just step in and buy a company. What if he had negative intentions? What if he just wanted to close the site down, or he just didn't like Twitter, so he wanted to delete Twitter? Because he has the money to do stuff like that, and that's bad. And
although I would say financially he doesn't have the incentive, because he would lose billions at this point. But I know what you're saying, right? He could totally turn this into a train
smaller
wreck.
Company.
I just don't, and I do find it weird that so-called populist people who hate the elites are that policy only works up until ideology comes into play. It's like, the elites are evil, the elites are doing this, and then Elon Musk comes along like, oh, no, he's cool because ideologically he seems to agree with us, so now it's fine to have him as the master of Twitter. It's like, that's not really a really good principle, but this gets back to every time we have strongmen and fascists in history. I'm not calling Musk a fascist necessarily, but I'm just saying when there are strong leaders that rule sometimes unfairly, people give him a pass if they're like, well, I like what he's doing.
Right.
There was that thing with, I hate to bring, I won't bring it up, but like people always kind of do this. Well, like he's cleaning up the place, he's making things work, so it's kind of okay. And I think that's just a weird policy to have, in terms of, because with the flip of a coin, that could be turned into a nightmare too, right? So I don't like this idea of like billionaires stepping in and just taking over stuff and being capricious, but that's the system people want, apparently, and they're cool with it. So that's what you get. If you don't like it, all right, well, then go start another company. In terms of what he's going to do with it, there's been rumors he's going to lay off a lot of people. People are probably excited about that. I don't know why you would be, cool, people losing their jobs. But then there was talk about monetizing Twitter, right? Because that's the big issue right now. For monetization, it relies on ads, which everybody hates, which is fair. But he's taking out billions and billions of dollars in loans on this, which means he's got to be able to make a profit on this company and pay that stuff off. And there's talks of being a subscription-based model. He does like subscriptions. I pay a subscription on my Tesla. I don't do for the full self-driving, but I could. It's something like $400 or $500 a month, which is absurd. But I do pay to have Spotify access in my car, like $10 a month, which is absurd, but it is what it is. So he likes subscriptions. It is guaranteed revenue that you can bank on for the next quarter and the quarter after that, which is what people like, or he does, when he's doing counting his money. So you may have to start paying for Twitter. There's also talk that you may have to start paying to embed tweets from verified users, on news media sites and stuff like that, which is interesting. But I think there's going to be definitely money is going to be exchanged. There's also this idea that something I do support, which is verifying everybody. Like, yeah, I'm a verified account. So I think everybody should be able to get verified, by which I mean you submit your license and you probably will have a credit card tied to your account for those payments. I think, like I said in some tweets recently, the problem with Twitter isn't politics per se. It's not your views on things that's the issue. It's the behavior of the user. So if it just happens to be you're anti-vax, cool. But a lot of anti-vax people turn out to be very aggressive and harass people on Twitter, including like threatening people like Fauci with, violence and stuff like that. That's the issue. It's not necessarily you're anti-vax. That's fine. It's just that when that turns into negative behavior that harasses people, it's up to a company to be like, well, we're going to enforce this, and that's what we're going to do. But I think in terms of cutting back harassment, if your account was tied to your real name, and I think that would be, because this is the reality, right? In real life, most people don't talk to the way they talk to people on Twitter. When it comes to strangers, although that's slowly changing for the worse too, unfortunately. But for the most part, you're not going to behave the same. And I will say, as someone who's verified and uses their real name everywhere, there's a lot more for me to lose if I say something really egregious on Twitter, right? If I said something like racial rants on Twitter, like there's a good chance future ago, like, then we decided we don't want to keep you employed, and they don't need to. They could fire me whenever they want to, right? So there's a lot of risk for me there. If you're just John Bob Booger 8976 and nothing is, you could say whatever you want on Twitter, your account gets banned. ROL, I'll just go create another, account. So but when you're verified, there's a lot more accountability there. And I think that's one way of cutting down on behavior. It doesn't mean that John Smith from New Haven, Connecticut still won't make a death threat or violence against someone. He still may, but at least there's more likely to be actual ramifications for doing that kind of thing.
So, and it is funny so go on.
Yeah, go ahead. No, it's all right.
I was going to say, it's funny because Elon he continues to harp on the idea of free speech, and Twitter should be an open platform where free speech is welcome. And whatever else. And he also mentions authenticating users and all that stuff and verifying them. It is interesting how, as of right now, Twitter, I would consider Twitter mostly a place for free speech. You can't be hateful, and being hateful will get you banned. And I assume that will remain the case even under Elon's reign. I don't think he would take away the ability to ban somebody if they're horrible or hateful or bullying or whatever. But verifying users would, in a weird way, sort of enable free speech in a better way than having it anonymously. Because anonymously, a lot of the time, it becomes false speech. It becomes trolling. And a lot of the people who say these ridiculous things usually don't even believe it in real life. And so that's not really free speech. That's just something else.
Because you're behind a mask.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not you. It's some screen name.
Yeah.
And there's no repercussions for your actions. And when you give that to humans, they sometimes can act very terribly. That's not to say there's not a role of being anonymous on the internet. I think there absolutely is, especially for repressive countries. I get that argument. But at the same time, I do believe that everybody should be able to get verified. And when you're verified, the default feed should only show other verified users. And I think if you're unverified, you shouldn't be able to interact with the verified people. And you can kind of do this now. Like if you can do in your settings, you can do like, oh, they haven't put in a phone number, they haven't verified their email, but there's nothing there for name verification. Like you could be all that still and not have your actual name and be a verified person. And so I think this is all going to be, and it would also cut down on bots too, right? So that's the big thing. But I think that should be the default thing. And I think it won't eliminate poor behavior on social networks, but I think it'll certainly curtail a lot of it, especially since your real life name is now tied to the things you say online. Like I said, when you're already verified, that's a risk. Like, I can't just go and just be a complete jerk because there'd be ramifications for my behavior.
A few people in the chat mentioning that there are genuine use cases for having an anonymous Twitter account. And we're not saying get rid of the ability to have those. What we are saying is users who are verified should have the choice of filtering out non-verified users if necessary, because that will weed out.
I think
that
should be the default view.
Yeah.
And if you want to go into anonymous land and start interacting with them, you can turn that on.
Yeah.
But I don't think that should be the default experience, because I don't find a lot of, positive actors are completely anonymous on the internet. That's not to say, like I said, there are whistleblowers, there are people who are under repressive governments. I get that. But if that's your beat, if you're a reporter and covering that stuff, by all means, go into it. If you're just a regular user who's just following the NHL scores or your favorite celebrity, what do you care about that kind of thing, right? But I'll also just say private networks, like this idea of like free, first of all, people who say I'm a free speech absolutist, you're not. You're a complete liar, and you have no idea what you're talking about. Because let me give you an example. If you absolutely believe that, say you got a 15-year-old daughter, she uses Twitter, right? Bunch of guys start sending her pictures of their genitalia. Free speech, right? You endorse that? You're okay with that? You okay with your daughter going on the internet and having guys sexually harass her? You're fine with that? There should be no repercussions for these kind of actions. Like, of course, I would hope not believe that stuff, which means you're lying. Should you be able to threaten people on the internet? Should you be able to dox and publish private information like their home address? Should you incite violence? Like there are restrictions on this stuff. So people who say I'm a free speech absolutist are just absolutely full of it. They don't know what they're talking about. Second, a private network. The beauty of private, so at least in America, we have private property. Walmart years ago, I forgot which album specifically, Walmart made a decision not to sell certain albums by certain artists. It doesn't agree with their policies and their virtues as a company. That's fine. I mean, if you don't like it, don't shop at Walmart. But Walmart, as a private company, can absolutely say, we're not going to carry this artist, or we're not going to sell this book. We don't think it reflects our values. Everybody is totally fine with that because that's private property. If you own a pizza store and a guy walks in and starts screaming racial obscenities and just being a real jerk to other customers and just push them around, or even just you're trying to argue with them. If you own that pizza shop, you can be like, sir, I need you to please leave. That person doesn't go, I have a right to be here. It's free speech. They don't have that right at all. They have to leave or the police will remove them. That's how private property works. When you have Twitter, it's private property. You agree to their terms of service. They don't need to justify why they do things. It doesn't need to be equal. It could be whatever they want it to be. And you don't have a choice because your choice is to use a service or not to use a service. And I don't know why I need to explain this to people, especially people on the right who have been so prominent about private property and business rights forever, but that's how private things work. And if you don't like Twitter, you disagree with it, go start your own social network. If we've seen it in the past, and those things catch on. There was MySpace, and of course now there's Facebook, right? So this idea of like balance, it just seems so arbitrary anyway. But again, I'm not up in arms about Musk. I'm happy to wait and see what he does with it. But I think there will be changes. I think there'll be changes that will upset both sides. I just want it to get better. I personally don't actually have a lot of problems because I don't argue with politics people on Twitter. Because guess what?
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't imagine there's any changes he can make that would upset my use of the service, only because I don't use Twitter for politics. And I think primarily all of his changes are going to evolve around people who use Twitter for politics.
I used to, right. Yeah, that's a good point. I used to argue with people about politics, and then I realized two things. One, it just turned into a hate fest quickly. Just people would you'd have one or two tweets that was almost a legitimate, sincere back and forth before it turned into, yeah, your face looks stupid. Who did your haircut? Or like, you look like a blah, blah, blah. And it just got really negative. Two, I also realized, guess what? No one ever changed their mind.
Right.
Like, when was the last time on Twitter someone who was like extreme right Trump supporter got into a fight with someone who supported AOC and the Trump supporter was like, you know what? That's a good point. I didn't see it from that perspective. I'm glad we had that conversation.
People might be more open to that if they had to be verified.
True. But I think that's sort of the dishonesty here is people get so wrapped up in their own tribalism that they refuse to sort of engage even in that legitimate back and forth. Let's talk about something kind of thing. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I don't think it's the end of the world, whatever. Just don't be on social media. And again, only 20% of the U.S. is on Twitter anyway. So it's like this is a very insular argument of people thinking Twitter is real life when it's not.
Yep.
So.
All right, we need to wrap this up.
Yep. Do you have a thing of the week?
I do not.
All right, then real quickly, my thing of the week was Godspeed You Black Emperor, which is they're a band. They're out of Canada, Toronto. I've been listening to them for almost 15 years at this point. I've seen them now for the second time in concert. They just played in Northampton about 2 weeks ago. and they're on tour right now. Go see them, I assure you, if you can. Go look them up. Godspeed You with an exclamation point, Black Emperor. It actually comes from a Japanese movie. They're one of the founders of basically what's called post rock, which is they write like songs that are like 12 minutes long, and they start off. They have 3 guitarists, 2 bass players, and 2 drummers, and a violin player. And the music is absolutely insane. It's all instrumental, no singing, and it's just very emotional, and it's a little dark and ethereal. They did a song on 28 Days, that zombie movie that came a long time ago called East Hastings. But it's really amazing, and I'll give you this. When you put on a song of theirs, don't just skip around like it's a pop song. Their song is going to be like 12 minutes. Get to the 7 or 8 minute mark. When you get to that, your brain will start to get what this music is about. But it slowly builds up to like a crescendo. And so you got to really just immerse yourself. My advice, put on headphones, sit in a dark room, put on some of their albums, and just kind of like go with it. It's some of the most transformative, impressive music I've ever heard. And I've seen Pink Floyd in concert. And I put this up there, seeing them in concert. I took my best friend there. He knew of them, but he didn't listen to them. And we sat down and we listened to it, and like he was completely blown away by the experience because they're just so good. But it's very different from your typical pop music, and they're cool. They're this weird collective. They don't really publish their names. They're kind of they're just a very interesting band. So Godspeed You, Black Emperor is my thing of the week. All right, Zach's got to go. He's got a date tonight with his girlfriend. But anyway, that wraps it up. Follow me on Twitter, Daniel_Rubino, and follow Zach at ZACBOWDEN. We'll of course be here next week for another podcast. As always, thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time. Take care, everyone.
All right, I can hang around literally for 5 minutes, then I do definitely have to head off. So if you have any questions, get them in now. We're doing final orders for questions straight away today because I do have to be gone in a few minutes. Yeah, lots to talk around the whole verifying users thing. Yeah, that's always been a polarizing topic for a lot of people. And again, it's to stress that we're not saying, it would be required for every account. You're totally free to your anonymity on the internet. But I personally think it should be an option to, at the very least, filter out those who refuse or don't want to be verified. And that's totally fine. And, if I'm having a genuine discussion or a serious discussion about a serious topic, I should have the option to filter out those who didn't want to verify themselves, just to make sure that nobody's trolling or sending horrible messages to me or the people involved in the conversation. And if anyone disagrees with that, that's curious. You shouldn't disagree with that. You should totally be okay to that idea, because why wouldn't you be okay to that idea?
Zach, are you aware of any performance upgrade in the pipeline for Xbox mid-cycle refresh? I've been hearing otherwise. Sorry if it's off topic. Didn't Jez have some thoughts about that?
I think they're working on I don't know if they'll have performance upgrades. I've not heard that, but I do think a new box is in the works, because they always do is like after a few years, there's always a newer design that comes out. Usually, performance-wise, it's usually the same. I don't think they're planning a performance upgrade. Maybe there'll be a very minor one, but I've not heard anything specific around a performance upgrade.
Someone's asking me, what's my view on OLED versus LCD and XPS 13 Plus? Good question. I gotta say, I've been mostly a fan of LCD, but I'm seeing a lot more OLED devices lately. And like OLED's gotten to the point now where it's balanced off the super contrast, and they give a lot of different sort of different color profiles, so it makes it less intense. You can make it look more like LCD. So I say go with OLED. The only downside is I do still believe OLED does consume more battery life. So if your battery life is really the main thing, I think go with LCD. But OLED is just, I'm using it on the Yoga 9i right now. And yeah, when I turn on that device, I'm like, this is starting to look really nice. Samsung, of course, uses it on their Galaxy Books too. So I say go with the OLED. But like I said, just remember battery life may be slightly worse. Catherine mentions Roger Waters is touring. Yes, I agree. I actually have his video documentary on the wall. So it's so good because it's in 4K that I'm like, I don't know if I need to go see him in concert. It's kind of like why I don't go see UFC in concert. Like I'll just watch it on pay-per-view. It's just way better viewing angles. But I agree, Roger Waters is, and I'm one of those. I think Roger Waters is the heart of Pink Floyd. I have a tough time Pink Floyd without Roger. I really love his work. So, but yeah, his wall show and everything he does is absolutely incredible.
Any news on the Surface Duo 2 glance bar improvements? And do you think the Slim Pen 2 will get the haptic feedback functionality on the Duo 2? Nothing to report on the haptic feedback stuff. I know Microsoft sort of said that that's something they would explore, but it really comes down to app developers, right? App developers need to sort of add support for it, and I don't think that's ever going to happen on Android. Regarding the glance bar,
they need to find. I was going to say, I think they need to find a way to create the API tools like they're doing with the is separating and all that for making apps dual screen. But they need to do it in a way that's sort of neutral to their own technology, so that other companies could release pens. I don't know. It's tough, but yeah.
Regarding the glance bar, I think I've mentioned it before, but the plan is to expand the support for which sort of apps show up on the glance bar to things like, third-party messaging apps, Telegram, Slack, WhatsApp, whatever they are these days, Snapchat. And I'm told that is the thing that exists internally and will likely show up at some point in the summer. I don't think it'll be in the May update. It could be June, or I think more likely July. But yeah, I'll keep you updated on when I hear a more accurate time frame for that. But it does exist. The updates do exist. They are real, and they will ship at some point this summer, before Android 12L.
Someone mentioned I ordered LCD because it's 500 nits versus 400 nits in OLED. So I get that. That's an interesting thing. Here's my experience with OLED displays so far. I've always had lower nits in the LCD, but you couldn't tell. The way OLED works, the per pixel illumination looks way brighter than it actually is. Even my own measurements, even on the Yoga, I was only getting like a little over 300 nits, but it's plenty bright and it works well outdoors, save for if there's any glare. But for some reason, OLED looks brighter at the same or lower nits than LCD does at higher nits. Because I think with LCD, it's a backlight that then needs to go through the pixels and compensate. I don't know. I don't know how it works necessarily. That's just my personal experience. I think you'll be happy either way. They're because I think they're probably still using IGZO, which is a combo like weird LCD kind of thing. There's a little bit more to it, but those displays always look fantastic anyway. So I think you'll be happy with either one. I mean, I've never been disappointed with Dell displays.
All right, I do need to head off.
Okay.
Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We'll be back next Friday. Follow us on Twitter. We'll keep you updated on when we go live. But until then, we will see you next time.
Bye.